Hey, do you remember this?
Coronavirus.
Coronavirus. Countries around the world have now reported more than 1 million coronavirus cases.
More than 3 billion people in almost 70 countries and territories have been asked to stay at home.
All I know is that the pandemic had to keep us inside and keep us away from people. And as someone who is in the education system at this point, it kind of threw me for a loop, and it paved the way for online learning. Online learning impacted every kid involved in a public or private school system. It didn't matter how old you were, it didn't matter who your parents were, it didn't matter where you were from. School took a pause, and so too did the young minds that needed it the most. This is me. I was 17 in March of 2020 when the pandemic shut my school district down. And I was 2 months away from graduating high school. These are my friends Sydney and Jorge. They're both in their final years of college, and they experienced online learning around the same time that I did.
It was weird, because it started the end of my junior year, and it was just like pure chaos, because obviously teachers have never had to deal with that before, and so trying to teach us while we're at home for like the remainder of the school year was just like kind of a joke, and I didn't pass my AP exams, but that's okay. Yeah, it was just weird, like the transition, because there wasn't really one. It was just we were in school and then we just weren't. Spring break, we never came back.
Honestly, it didn't feel that real, you know? Like, all you hear is like, okay, yeah, we're in a pandemic, and we're like, all right, it's gonna be over in like 3 weeks, right? Then it turns into a month, then 2 months, right? And then it's just like, that's when I start thinking, hey, you know, like what's going on around in the world, and it's just like, I don't know, you start thinking about all that stuff. But then at the same time, like video games, you know, it's just a time to just like play video games every single day. So
Video games. I love video games. During the pandemic, Jorge and I weren't the only people to stray away from school and drift towards technology. A study conducted by the National Center for Biotechnology Information found that both children and adolescents use technology to deal with struggles that were going on during the pandemic. More people inside and isolated meant more time on smartphones, video game consoles, and less time out in the world, interacting with others. Letitia Bassford, an education professor at Hamline University, saw the aftermath of the pandemic cause all kinds of damage to young students.
Today, we're still experiencing the aftermath of that. Today, we still have incredible chronic absenteeism. Parents and children alike learned how to not take that responsibility of going to school that seriously for a while. So I think we're still recovering from that, and we're still recovering from huge amounts of academic loss and, quite frankly, social loss. You know, school is a socializing factor too, and when you don't have kids engaged in school, they lose out on that part of life too.
Like I said earlier, this was my last semester of high school, which is arguably the least impactful from an academic standpoint because it's just time for celebration and excitement. I imagine still having to learn how to read chapter books or solve long division problems without a classroom environment or a licensed teacher.
I do know, and I have heard, and I've heard this from teachers and I've heard it from staff, the same kinds of things at an earlier point in the process. What I would just describe as issues with capacity, the needs of younger kids and the kinds of impacts, social emotional impacts have been really significant. And so just behavioral and emotional challenges are way, way, way higher. Not the normal rate of growth, but like geometric growth. So, you know, maybe 1 year it's 2 and the next year it's 21, right, students in a classroom.
That's Dr. Ryan LeCount, the chair of the sociology department at Hamline University. Dr. LeCount emphasizes that these changes to education did anything but help the social and emotional progress of these young students. But what about the people who are interacting with these students day in and day out? With Dr. LeCount's very own son being one of the children who was helped by the teachers through the pandemic.
It's tough, and with his childcare and other kinds of things, I saw a lot of people doing incredible work because there was both lower levels of staffing and way higher need, which is similar to what we're dealing with in higher ed.
I mean, you had teachers, first of all, who were afraid to come back during the tail end of the pandemic, the height of the pandemic. They didn't want to get ill. They were worried about their own health. But then when they were back, they were faced with these enormous behavioral issues. And it was real. It was real. The kids had forgotten how to do school. And they had lost out on huge amounts of academic achievement as well. So the teachers are working double time to try to catch kids up to what they've lost academically and also re-socialize them to schools. And some teachers just couldn't do it.
Letitia talked about this idea of teacher burnout and how these behavioral changes and just the changes in the education system are having people stray away from teaching and not go into it at all. And the pandemic forced people to end their careers early as teachers or force them to leave the entire profession for good.
I think the teachers were just like us, the students, They didn't really know what to do, but they also tried their best. Everything was asynchronous, everything was up to us, but they would always send out an email, They always try to be proactive and hey, you got this too, hey, do this, and some would contact students personally. So I think they were doing a pretty solid job at the same time, but I think it was very difficult for them as well, especially when it was all asynchronous.
I'm very appreciative for my teachers that I had because they clearly cared a lot. I remember sometimes I'd log into the first Zoom meeting of the day, and especially when I didn't care, I'd go back to sleep and I'd set an alarm and wake up to switch to the next Zoom. And as it kind of went on, I started to feel bad because I know I built a relationship with my teachers because they had also individual meetings each week that they would set up with each of their students. And so I was they don't have to do those things.
As I wrap up my final semester at college, I think back to the first semester I was enrolled here. I had to walk down a hallway with a mask on. I couldn't visit other people's dorms. And I would call people, friends and family, often to see how they were doing. And the conversations were complicated and they were hard. People were struggling and people are still struggling.
We really started paying attention to mental health during the pandemic, and schools are talking about mental health in ways they never did to the degree that they are now. And I think that was one of the best things about the pandemic is, sure, it caused a lot of mental health issues in our students, but it also helped us pay attention and start to think more concertedly about how to support our students.
My pandemic experience had its own complications. I didn't have to endure the pain of losing a loved one. I didn't have to raise a child with behavioral issues, and I didn't have to learn my ABCs. To the students whose education was impacted heavily by the pandemic, I encourage you to keep going and to not give up on what you're capable of. And to the teachers and to every other essential worker, thank you.